There is a test, a kind of a verbal self-diagnosis that some of you might find interesting. I took the basis of this from the conditions of this other place, another planet, if you will, that I may mention in a second. But having a knowledge of the way things were situated there and the kind of pertinence of a sort that I can make thereto related to us, it's a kind of test that you can ask yourself this: is it possible that you could say this internally, at the very least, that you could say this? Here it is, the quote. I guess I understand what you mean, but I don't feel any better. Which, if there's any doubt, I'll give you another version, would be, I think that's correct, but I still don't feel any better. Now, have you got the range of it? That this is in response, apparently, to something that you have been told, something that seems to have had its genesis out there, either something you observed, perhaps even initially you thought, and there's some discussion, and then your comment, either overtly or to yourself, that once it's stated by somebody, even one of your own voices from your own solar system, that says, well, you understand, or do you see that such and such is the case? And if you can look and then you say, that is correct, I guess, but I don't feel any better. If you can do that, I have got to suggest to you most strongly that you failed the test. This is a very elusive, inconsequential test, because it would only have to do with somebody attempting a kind of interplanetary travel that actually goes nowhere in particular. But if you were attempting to do and pursue whatever this kind of activity is, I'm afraid that you would not yet qualify as a real traveler if that still had any validity, if that was possible. If you ask yourself, could that happen to me? Does that still happen to me? Under that form of this little self-check, this kind of self-diagnosis, you would have to determine that you are still suffering from the illness of being human, being earthbound. The place from which I took this other spot, the creatures are constructed in such a way that it is not possible, it is not naturally possible for them to in any way feel, such as my self-check test I gave you, that yes, that may be correct, I think that's correct, but I don't feel any better. Remember the feel in that sentence, in that test. That the creatures on this other planet from which I derived this test, my version of it, it is not naturally possible for them to feel anything that isn't within any sort of conflict with what they see to be intellectually correct. What they see to be intellectually a correct representation of their instant conditions. It's just not possible. That's why I couldn't say that I took this test from there, because it does not naturally arise under those conditions. But there is a pertinence. Now consider a place wherein a creature, a person, let's just call them people, persons, that a person's knowledge of something. How about the people there understood what, if they had some form of sadness, as we call it, if they had some form of sadness, And they see sadness for what it is. Of course, basically what it is, if I'm going to make a distinct, direct parallel between us and them, it is like everything else. It is molecular activity within this organism. It has to do with different hormonal balances. Certain kinds of neural activities go on, and somebody feels sad. They may feel sad individually. It may seem to be a family affair or a death. It may be a tribal affair or some sort of threatened doom or danger for this large group. But just taking that one line of sight, these creatures, if they had an intellectual knowledge of what something is, in this case, sadness, it precludes them from having any feeling, as we would call it, of sadness. That is, they could not be captive of the emotion. So it would be impossible for them to, they would never even think of such a sentence as to say, back to here, my kind of example. If someone was attempting to tell, if one creature was attempting to tell another one, do you know what sadness is? It's not some sort of really emotional, it's not some uniquely human, it is not something that exists in some kind of nebulous psyche of man. It is a molecular activity, no different from being horny, being hungry, being frightened. And yet, on this planet, the way the emotions are wired up in our nervous system, and then the way they are connected to the higher end of the nervous system into brain functions. Sadness. Let's take over death. Sadness is unique. Sadness does not exist in any other creature that is visible to man on this planet. No other creature seems to suffer sadness in some way that is unique to their position. That monkeys or dogs or possums do not seem to suffer sadness over some death. And this one creature tells the other one, though, that, yeah, it appears to be something unique. And I know it's widespread ramifications, that there's poetry written about it, there's been mausoleums, there's been cathedrals, mosques, there's been books, there's been wars fought over what seems to be this kind of singular human feeling of sadness. But it is not unique in some way that is indescribable. It is not otherworldly, literally. It is molecular activity. It has to do with hormones being heated up, slowing down, the balance inside an individual changing, and it comes out as sadness. So let us say that one creature tells this to another one, and the creature, of course it would be primarily an intellectual transfer. The other creature listens, and perhaps they go into further detail. And that apparently the first one almost overwhelms the second one with intellectual energy, and the second one says, all right, I guess you're correct, but I don't feel any better. That is, I was sad. I had a feeling about sadness, but let's take it to its real nice direct example, that yes, I was feeling sad, is why we got in this conversation. But now after listening to what you pointed out, there's no doubt sadness, and perhaps even goes further, but what you have just presented to me, there's no doubt that you cannot separate sadness, grief, from molecular activity. That it is molecular activity inside of me. It is the change in hormonal balances, neurotransmitters, on and off switches, changes and combinations, chemical combinations in me. You're correct. But I'm still sad. That is, I do not feel any better. Can you perceive just for a second a place where that is not possible? It's simply not possible. The sentence would be an extension of some form almost of an oxymoron, that it is just self-contradictory. They could not in any way say they could not in any way, of course, experience literally that, yes, I hear what you're saying. I can see it myself. There's no doubt that is correct, but it does not change the way I feel. If that is possible for you, to transfer that back to here, if that is possible for you, I don't want to make you feel bad on Friday, but well, let me put it to you this way. You didn't pass the test. You didn't pass the test with honors. All right? You perhaps need some brushing up. Part of the utilitarian purpose of talk on our planet, to expand on something I've hit twice in passing over the last few weeks, a part of the purpose is this. It is to temporarily make energy through words appear to be matter. Now that is one of the specific purposes of language on planet Earth. A specific case in point that we're talking about. The naming of emotions. Of course, to start with, just the naming of something in our language on this planet of, hey, there is something known as emotions. And it was talked about for a little bit, and everybody finally agreed, yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I can feel that. I felt that. So we have named emotions. Part of the purpose, as I was mentioning, of a very specific utilitarian direction is that in this case it has apparently taken energy, called it emotion, and now it is apparently a stable, in the sense that you can talk about it, a solid piece of matter, that sadness is something. Now, no one in the ordinary bell curve of ordinary intelligence would fall prey to me saying, well, you can't buy sadness, they can't package it, you can't get it in a blister pack somewhere. But yet, when you say sadness or grief, and if you are not pushing the limits of your own intelligence, if I just say, well, I'm going to talk about sadness for a while, everybody knows what I mean, don't you? You'd all go, yeah. Because sadness is a something stable enough that we can talk about it. I could say now there can be degrees of sadness. You might be sad if your mother died, but you might be less sad if a great aunt died that you've only met 20 times in your life. Never go, yeah. And so it seems to be something, though, that is a stable, that we're talking about something that everyone understands, that everyone has experienced, that everyone has felt, that it is a something. A part of the purpose of making energy temporarily appear as matter and making it appear to be something stable enough that different creatures can discuss. That is, pass the energy around that, let me tell you something about your experience. You're real sad right now, aren't you? You go, yeah. Let me tell you something about sadness. Okay. And so you're apparently talking about something that's stable enough that both of you, both of the parties, or one person talking and thousands of people listening, that we're all talking about more or less the same thing. Part of the purpose also of making energy appear as a temporarily matter is, are you ready? Is by so doing, it also makes it seem to be malleable. It is subject to alterations. It is subject to change. If you can talk about it, if you can turn energy temporarily into apparently matter, and no one has ever analyzed it this way, so don't scratch your head trying to place this together with something else. But if you can make energy appear to be matter, it goes with it. It's right at the basis of language, not just this example. It's at the basis of the utilitarian purposes I was saying of talk, one of them, then the absolute, tacit, but absolute basis right where I'm pointing is once you have turned energy temporarily into apparent matter, it goes without anybody's saying, it goes without anyone's ordinary thought process any further, that if it is matter, it is plastic, it is pliable. If we're talking about something that exists like sadness, then let's talk about it. And what you're saying is we can do something about it. You don't have to be a psychiatrist, but that's the basis of that. You don't have to be a priest and taking confession, which is part of it. It can just be two ordinary people, two family members, two friends that, listen, I can see the kind of grief and the sadness you're going through, but God love you, sit down here and let's talk about it. But what you're saying is we can do something about it. Consider the alternative. If we did not take energy, I'm playing really with reality and stretching rubber reality to the point that B.F. Goodrich is getting a hernia. But if we could have it both ways right quick, if you can hear me. Imagine if we were discussing energy, and we could discuss energy and not put on the temporary clothing of words that made it appear to be matter, that if sadness were just taken as being energy, and I don't know what we'd call it then, we wouldn't be calling it sadness, but follow me right quick if you can. You understand then, you would not be treating it as though you could alter it. It would just be, there you are. Do you see that that would be only fitting for a planet where there is no growth taking place? You'd be talking about conditions wherein things are as they are. People can have some, you might say, knowledge of it, which wouldn't be necessary, but to explain it a little bit, that they'd have some knowledge of it and live with it. That is not the case of our position. That is not the case of humanity. That is not the purpose. That is in direct conflict with the major purpose that humanity is playing. By continuing to grow, by life having a place to expand certain kinds of energies right up here. Very little anymore lower down in the nervous system. Very little is there any kind of experimentation or growth going on physically. We have not changed that much. Emotionally, you get into what would seem to be the mid-range, you might say, of the human nervous system. The kind of physiological area generally called the limbic part of the nervous system, which is not specifically what I'm talking about, but they're pointing in the same general direction for different purposes. That has not changed all that much. Now the higher end keeps crying out that it must. And you can see change taking place. You can see it historically if you're going to deal with backward history. Or you can see some of it apparently taking place now. But the kinds of human emotions, the kinds that the higher end of the nervous system, the thinking part, the talking part, wants to say is detrimental, greed, hostilities, well, you got to do something about it. The nervous system has been saying that, life has been saying that through man's mouth for thousands of years. Although it changes, it gradually changes, you notice it has not been eradicated. The day is not over. The place where drastic change can take place, the place where it is growing, is, as I described once, if you imagine a great rubber glove filled with evolutionary energy, goo, and down one finger is that little pinhole, and life is squeezing on it, and that little pinhole is the high end of the nervous system of man. That's where the creative goo begins to seep out. Nowhere else. It can swell up a finger down here, and humans might get bigger and fatter. But for it to actually grow, it's just in that one spot. It's the only one spot that should be of any interest in you because you're right here. Putting clothes on energy through words takes man's intellectual interest, attraction to raw energy into another direction. It keeps people, as it were, from rushing up to a volcano and sticking their face into it to see what's going on. It keeps people from doing that to each other to varying degrees. It is a piece of that singular ability on this planet that humans have to be able not only to act and driven to act, but under certain conditions, to think about acting. That they do not act on the basis that would seem to be comparable to another creature on this planet, that there seems to be a kind of external stimuli of a certain sort that you might reasonably expect, well, he or she is going to go, and react immediately. Or I may. If that happened to me, you heard some story about something that happened, and you went, boy, if that happened to me, I'd immediately leaped at that person's throat. I'd have screamed out, get away from me. You might say that, but then if it happened, you or somebody else might go and think about acting rather than act. If we did not have words to put clothes on energy and to temporarily make it appear to matter, humans would be continually rushing up, trying to discover the nature of fire metaphorically and otherwise, not only volcanoes, but opening doors to furnaces and everywhere else, and opening just stick their face right in and go, hello, and that'd be the end of it. Or that'd be the end of that one explorer. And you'd have a whole line of little Einsteins and people waiting, trying to take a good look, and everybody keeps rushing up, and they get so close, they get hurt. Putting clothes on energy slows it down as far as the human intellect is concerned. It slows the tempo, it lowers the temperature. Talk, in that sense, begins to act as a kind of very peculiar, I guess, piece of examining equipment. It'd be a combination microscope and telescope, which is irrelevant, but it'd be a piece of equipment comparable to that when you looked at energy, it slowed it down, lowered its temperature, and it removed you at least one step away from what's going on. Because if you were looking directly at energy, as why I said it would be comparable to rushing right up and opening a furnace door or volcano, like, boy, I'm going to learn the secrets of the universe, and you just stick your head right down in there and you're done for. In that sense, words are like one step backwards. They are like clothing. But to have to play with this kind of reality again, you could look at it another way if you haven't already, and say if that were the limits of the conditions, then I would have to raise an objection, or I would have to ask a question, you might say. And that is that begins to smell as far as having some ultimate perception of what's going on. It would almost seem as though I would be better off not to have to put words on energy. Which, if you followed that, could sound as though you were making a reasonable approach in another direction to examining yourself in life. But if it went no further than that, I've got to point out to you that what you have done is taken a step backwards. Because that is the immediate trap of believing that man has gone downhill. That in the pre-speech state of the human nervous system, that is where the secret lies. The noble savage again. That if I were back in my pre-speech state, then I would not be victim to, I would not be a captive of this artificial clothing that the intellect via speech puts on energy and slows it down, confuses the issue, and turns it into matter. Now, I'm going to rhetorically assume that all of you that's been around here a while are no longer that dumb. But notice, the only reason I bring it up again is not to say that I hope you're not that dumb, but to show that at the ordinary level of the operations of the earthly intellect, based upon what I was first pointing out, that would seem, what I just said, the last example, would seem to be the alternative. The alternative. That, all right, the way you put it, it might sound as though it would be some benefit if you could look upon energy, look upon what's going on, and not have to be one step removed, not have this kind of artificial piece of molecular technology, speech, between me and what's going on, so that I could just look directly, as mystics used to like to say, directly into the face or the depths of creation. And that would seem to be the alternative. But that's only on this planet. That's only on gravity-held intelligence. Because you cannot go backwards. And if you go backwards, if you can, then I got to point out to you, if you can go backwards, what you've done is go backwards. So you should hope that you can't. You should hope that I'm correct that you can't. But if you can go back, what you've done is gone back. But you do not go back and take along all of this new luggage and silk scarves and fancy stereo equipment and books that you have. If you do go back, you would go back. And you'd go back as naked as you started with. You'd go back as nonverbal. You'd go back as primitive as you were. What it takes is going off in another direction that ordinary intelligence cannot perceive. Thus, you've got the kind of weirdness of this kind of activity here and there. Because there is nowhere that ordinary intelligence can say that if, on its own, if you had done it on your own, if it was possible that you could go, not only the examples I'm using tonight and the directions and kind of mappings I'm laying out about talk, that not only, let's take that, if on your own sometime you had come up with the idea that some way talk, as great as it is and as great as the intellect is and as much fun as much as it seems to have helped me, I've got this great theory. It distracts me and it's so good I believe there's some validity. I almost believe it myself. And even I thought of it. And that is that talk in some way takes what's got to be just a living, vital energy of all of creation and putting names on things. It's like a temporary slowing it down and kind of holding it and grabbing this great wild beast and trying to domesticate it for a second. That it puts you one step away, that what you're dealing with no longer is a real wild cheetah or tiger, because now that you've got it housebroken, domesticated, I mean, it kind of looks like a tiger, but it's not the real thing anymore. So, the kind of secrets I want, what I want, is some stage before that when I was peering directly into volcanoes and the mouths of tigers, before I actually could talk, before there was this kind of, albeit pretty interesting, but this kind of artificial buffer of my intelligence between me and everything else. Where would you, if I had jumped out and said, wait a minute, neither one of those are going to take you anywhere. And then I disappeared and you went, boy, how spooky. That must be true. That's some kind of mystical message. And you thought, all right, if that's true, all right, so I didn't have it. I was thinking about going in the back direction. All right, so what would I do? You could sit there the rest of your life and I guess appear to become a holoreographic post model for Rodin, doing this. You'd sit there the rest of your life thinking, all right, what can I do? And you don't know what to do because ordinary intelligence has explored all of its possibilities. And of course, the possibility is always, if you understand what I mean, going back. That is, the possibility, the only possibility is always turning the coin over, the opposite. It is somewhere else. And somewhere else goes in a direction that is not governed by gravity of this planet. It is not governed by the gravity of language. That is, that, all right, if one thing's not true, if this is not the best way, if just talking about stuff is not going to get me where I'm going, then okay. I'm glad you pointed out because now I know what to do. Instead of me naming stuff and thinking about their names, I just won't do it. I'll stop it. At one time I couldn't. When I was a kid I couldn't. So now I won't do it anymore. That's all you can do. You would be back in the position if you had gone through all that on your own, if anybody had, and I don't mean that you should have or that it was possible. I'm using that as one of my cockamamie examples. If that had happened, you would still be in the position of, okay, now that you put it that way and I think about it, I believe that's correct, but I don't feel any better. That is, my present experience of feeling unfulfilled, being confused, remains. The dichotomy of that is impossible to live with inside of one person if they are a real traveler. That yes, that's correct. I see it's correct. There's no doubt. That is correct. That is it. That is a true intellectual reflection of the conditions as they are. But I don't feel any better. I do not feel differently about it. Attempting to deal with all verbal maps, all talk on this planet, because all talk on this planet is gravitationally held, literally, which is another subject, but it is. It's not that language is bad, it's not that language is dumb, because I've already pointed out to you in a certain sense, talk may be the ultimate victor. But that and everything else is subject to what I was about to say, that all verbal maps are gravitationally held. Therefore, you're always dealing with up and down, whether they're going to float or fall down. So you're always dealing with that kind of limited range. And all of these maps of any kind are dimensionally short, no matter how good they are. No matter if they're the best maps available on this planet. Just in an ad hoc sense, just about one specific thing. If you're dealing with talk, they're always dimensionally short. Always. If you still need any other place to try and get your finger in the crack, remember the last time that we were taping and I was trying to show you that if I was talking to that piece of easel paper that I was drawing on, and I was drawing something and tried to tell the paper, if the paper had any intelligence and I was trying to tell it what was on the paper could not see past the two possibilities that I was drawing on the paper. And if I said there are three possibilities right there, the third possibility to the paper, if it could see it, if I did take the paper, remember, and sort of turned it back on itself, and I said, look, damn it. If I could do that, and the paper would look at itself and go, ah, what you're dealing with, if it would be possible, which is not, that your brain, literally, nothing all that mystical, that your brain in some place in itself had a little bitty brain hand, and it could reach in there and say, look, damn it. And you know, which it does say that, we're not being spooky. You know you talk to yourself all the time. You people that may be getting this on tape at some other time in some other place, you may say, I don't talk to myself. That's weird. Some of you may say, I got an uncle that goes around muttering to himself, but I don't talk to myself. I hate to tell you, you're going to have to face up to it real quick. Everybody talks to themselves. People call it different things. Of course, that's not even it. It's this PA system that's running through everybody, and it's multi-channel. But your brain would have to say, well, what's going on here? Some of what he says sometimes almost makes sense, or sometimes even on my own, I believe I'm about to make some kind of major intellectual breakthrough, and it's like I always get to this, I don't know, some sort of psychological cul-de-sac. But if the brain knew what it was doing, it had a little hand, if it reached up and grabbed a piece of itself and folded it over to another part of the brain, then your own brain would fold itself over and look and go, ah! And if it had a little thigh, it would maybe slap its little thigh and go, that's it! That's it! All maps, in other words, all thinking held down by this planet is dimensionally short. It's always dimensionally short. Thus the maps are always not completely unfolded. Now on the basis of that, I was going to give you another example that's right in the sense of what we're talking about tonight. All of these attempts that have gone on throughout the intellectual history, the talking history of man, all the way from, to use a good old Western example, from the Sumerians and the Greeks playing with the ideas of gods, all the way up to that somewhat aborted attempt at sociobiology here in your last decade. You've had these little attempts, and the sociobiology, their attempt brought it fairly close up to some of my kind of verbal, dimensionally flawed map making. But there appears to be this kind of dichotomy again that's expanding what I'm talking about. That people nowadays could say, certain people, or they could read this, and fairly educated, sophisticated people nowadays could go, yeah. But most people could even say this. They would not use as far into the depths of the kind of terms I was going to use, but people do say this. Are you ready? I'm going to give you two different ways about the same sort of thing. A person could say, while explaining their behavior, let's say to another person, and they're intelligent enough just generally to use these kind of descriptions. The person says, I've got to, I guess, apologize or give you an explanation about why I seem less than enthusiastic about my participation in our activities here. I know I agreed to help you, but you may or may not know. It's not really an excuse, but I just want to tell you, I flew in last night from Belgium. And I don't have to say to you about jet lag. And because of these external conditions, I was in Belgium. I didn't plan to be there. I had to go on business, and I didn't forget our appointment. That's why I flew over last night to be here with you. But because of external conditions is what they're saying. Because of external conditions, that is the moving through time zones, going against my own circadian rhythms, my body has been upset. The hormones inside of my own body have been put out of balance, out of normal balance to such a degree that I want you to know I have no less enthusiasm for our plans and that we've been talking about. But this afternoon, a few hours ago, I just want to tell you that's why I was acting that way. I did my best to fight it. But you cannot fight hormones. You can't fight your own genes. What's going on? My molecules made me do it. And I couldn't help it. It's not an excuse, it's a statement of fact. All right? So it seems to be, and I'm not bringing that up in some sarcastic manner. Don't take it that way, that the man was trying to make a cop-out. I'm trying to say that this is not absolutely foreign to the kinds of thinking that's available to a fairly wide range of creatures on this planet. But now, same sort of conditions, and somebody could put it this way. Not exactly the same circumstance, but the same kind of conditions. A person could say, after a meeting, one guy says to another, I sure do appreciate the way that you got in there and really carried the ball for us, and the kind of enthusiasm that you had for our plan really kind of carried the meeting along, I thought. And this other guy could say, yeah, that's true. And that's what I like about good plans and being enthused about something, because the truth is, I don't know if you know it, but I had to take an all-night flight from Belgium last night. I haven't had any sleep, and I can't even tell what time it is. My insides are all torn up. And the other guy said, yeah, I know about that kind of stuff. In fact, I've been reading. Do you know what it does to your hormones? And you go, yeah. He said, but you know what's weird? When you really got something going, it's like I got off that plane, jumped in a taxi to rush over here, and I realized I couldn't. My eyes looked bad. My heart was kind of out of flutter. I hadn't been able to eat. And now I got to think about our plans. And just riding over here, the 20 minutes from the airport, and me thinking, and whether the guy had the ability to say this, people know this nowadays. They accept this as reality. The person could say, that's one of the beauties of being enthusiastic about something. Because what he's saying is, inside of me, not externally, because externally I already had adverse conditions. But internally, my own brain, I just coming over here and thinking about, God, how great it would be if we can get this plan going. And as tired as I was, my own brain began to affect my hormonal system, began to put out the kinds of neurotransmitters that were being adversely affected because of the time lag, the jet lag, which is a fact. But what it appears to be is inside of me. Forget out here, I've already had adverse circumstances that were adversely affecting my molecular life inside. And my own brain began to put out the kinds of messages, send out the kinds of transmissions, changed, which it does, changed the hormonal balance in me, the kind of enthusiasm we got to turn the table. It would seem, without any doubt, I'm not questioning this yet now, But I just want everyone to understand that this is surely within the range of just your reading knowledge nowadays. That it appears to be absolutely correct, medically verifiable, that you, just any good, healthy, ordinary person, can have something such as moving through different so-called time zones, moving from one spot spatially on this planet in another direction at a speed past which your internal rhythms can keep track. That it will change the hormones, their balance in you, it will change, which it does ordinarily without going anywhere. The regular kind of 24-hour rhythms in you, that there are times that your hormones are in certain balances as known as the peak times. The times that almost everybody seems to be able to think sharper. They feel better. And forget all things about, well, that's because that I have a PhD in economics. It's like everything else, but at least face it right now for a second. It has to do with forces absolutely beyond your control, all right? That it just happens that everybody hits peaks. And they have done now enough that even medical science, they of course don't go any further, it's not their job, that you can take the whole planet Earth, all humans fall within about a 90-minute period, whether you're a day worker or a night worker, but within that kind of 24-hour, that there is a period that is peak. And you got nothing to do with it. It's just there. And then you've got the other side of it. The gravity pulls it the other way, and it's almost a 12-hour other way. But, and that was the kind of first example I'm giving, that is that life itself, the forces, not excuses, the guy wouldn't make excuses, it's just what seems to be happening out there can have such an effect, without any doubt, without any question, such an effect on me, molecularly, just absolutely, materially, that it can just change you. I mean, to such a degree that this plan is my life, and yet I could hardly talk coherently in that meeting because of the fact of me flying overnight from Belgium to here and going through what it would be 5 or 6 time zones and trying to, I could not do it, literally. And then the other way, that another guy says, almost the same circumstance, more or less, and he says, not incorrectly, that coming over here, I thought when I got off the plane, I thought I was dead. I thought I was going to have to skip the meeting. And I sat there and I started just kind of daydreaming as the cab was coming into town and started thinking about what it would be if we can get this damn deal off the ground. If we can get the backing and people go for that. And I got more and more excited. And it was like something came over me, just enthusiasm. What it appears to be, not incorrectly. That through some way that's almost considered the sentence did not start with me considering the environment and what had happened to me. It was inside of me, inside of my own universe, my brain began to put out the change, the quantity, the quality, the mix of the neurotransmitters it was putting out just because of me thinking. I just thinking about, God. At first, I got to admit, I was thinking about, God, I'm so tired. I don't know whether I can even make sense at that meeting. I don't know whether I can even, whether I should show up. And I was thinking about, boy, how terrible it would be to blow this. And then just almost immediately I began to just kind of fantasize about, yeah, but if we can make this deal fly, my whole life it'll take on a whole new meaning. I'll have everything. My brain began to then, and it seemed to be just me. It's just me sitting in the back of a cab, driving along in quiet. My brain began to put out, cause molecular changes in me, and I'm different by the time I showed up. From any ordinary intellectual view, both of those take place nowadays. There's no question about it. Earthbound intelligence would never even ask this question, much less answer it, but let me go ahead and point out the obvious to you. Well, I'll give you several possibilities. If both of those are true, which they are almost, well, they're correct. If you take into account a missing dimension, they're beyond even true, they're correct. Then, all right, does that mean that one of them's correct and the other one's less correct? Or does that mean that one's correct and the other one is actually flawed? Can they both be true? Can they both be correct? How do you know if they can both be correct? How do you know which one is taking place? Even though I said, for the second example, all right, let's pretend that the sentence didn't start with any notice of the conditions. That the guy's just in the cab and he's tired, and we don't know why. We forget they flew overnight. We didn't know that. He's just tired, he doesn't feel like going to the meeting, but some way his own brain, his imagination, begins to enthuse him, and literally, they can measure it, it's not in question, the brain begins to change, put out different qualities of neurotransmitters. It affects the hormonal balance, adrenaline, affects the whole nervous system. The whole man is changed, and it came from in here. Then we can say, wait a minute, that you can say don't count anything external, but that's not possible. Are you following this? If you're going to say that both of those are true, where are you going to cut off reality? Where are you going to cut the sausage off the links? And so we're going to start here. That we are run by these little molecular institutions, structures, madmen, madwomen inside of us. But sometimes, even if that's true, sometimes they're not run directly from us. It's something out there caused it to happen. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying something out there made it happen. The temperature will change what happens to your hormonal balance, which is you. The temperature. Everybody knows that. It gets too hot, you get irritable. That's no small thing. You can get irritable and blow a deal. You can get irritable and blow a love affair. And later, if somebody asks you, you can finally say, oh, well, hell, I was tired of her anyway. You wasn't tired of her anyway. You don't know why you did it. Why you did it was, it got too hot. But you can say, well, she kept bugging me. All the time, she's always asking stuff like, you want me to turn the air conditioner down? And finally I thought, oh, to hell with this. Who needs it? And it seems to make sense. To other earthbound people, they go, yeah, I know what you mean. And that wasn't what did it. It was too hot. But where are you going to start that kind of intellectual attempted insight through talk? To say, well, wait a minute. It is molecules making me do stuff. But am I in some way causing my molecules to do it, such as being enthusiastic and making myself get up and do exercises or work 3 jobs? Am I making myself do that? And you can go, well, yeah. But then you can go, well, wait a minute. Why do I want to do that? And then you can say, if you were passing in the city, I guess, on regular conditions, they might say, well, this is being real truthful. But a man might say, you know why I'm working 3 jobs and going to school at night? I got to admit it. When it comes to my 25th reunion back at college, I want to show up and be the richest bastard there, the most successful. And so I got to admit, it's a kind of greed, it's a kind of pride in myself. In other words, it's kind of external forces makes me then make myself, that my brain is greedy and has pictures of me being successful and all my old friends envying me. So that makes my brain make me get up and do all this. But somebody else could say, well, never mind all that. I think about what's the purpose in life these few short years? Should I just stumble around and be a bum, just do nothing? Why not go ahead and go for all of it? Why not really try to do something? And so I kind of made myself. I'm not taking a lot of credit for it. But I don't really care that much what people think. My family didn't drive me to be a success. I was just kind of left alone. I had a decent childhood and didn't do much of anything, but I sit around now at this age and I think, shit, why not? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go ahead. I always wanted to try so-and-so, and I'll do it, and maybe I'll make a big success of it. So as far as I can tell, nothing out of the ordinary out there made me do it. I did. I'm not bragging, but it's just I sit around and thought, well, what should I do? Why not go ahead and try to do this? And so my brain put out the juices. Here is a place, and after all that, some of you, I'm afraid you're going to miss it tonight, but let me put it to you in a nice picture, and maybe it'll come back to you if you don't see the significance. You can picture it this way: the human nervous system is very unusual if you look at it this way, as a living antenna, but it both broadcasts and receives. Did I say unusual? It broadcasts the same one, and it receives. And doing one or the other does not preclude one or the other.
Yeah.
And via talk, it also comes up, finally, as I might point out, sort of an aside, was old Tesla and the people that always dreamed of somebody being able to send electricity through the air. Human nervous system. There it is. The dreamed of magic of a lot of these guys that were thinking, boy, I could make a fortune, which I guess they could if I could figure out how to send electricity through the air. Forget all these damn poles and setting up lines. The human nervous system is it. If my example of how it can apparently be, or how it is at our level, a correct telling that circumstances has churned up my own hormonal systems in such a way that seems to have motivated me to do so-and-so. Somebody else under the exact same conditions, or the same guy, the same person in those conditions, at another second later, another time, could say, I got to take full credit or full blame for this because I can't tell you anybody made me do this. I kept daydreaming about this kind of stuff, and I just decided, what the hell, I'm going to try it. And so I just up and did it. That both of them can be correct. But it is not limited to the examples I use, and is not limited to what would seem to be physical motivation to make somebody act a certain way or talk a certain way. It is anything that seems to have two possibilities. It is any way in which the ordinary intellect can talk about something, to take the energy of something going on and turn it into temporary matter, not enough to talk about it, and you can start the sentence apparently here and stop it here and say, well, such and such is true in my case. Or you can move it one step back or one step forward. That, hey, we're all kind of victim of our environment. I'm sorry for what I did now that I'm caught at it, but if you knew my childhood, I couldn't help it. All right, you cut it off, and that's an accepted statement of reality under many, many conditions, many, many parts of this planet, many, many time zones. That's correct. But it's also correct in part of reality for a person to say, what you did, and by the way, don't even bother. I see what you're going to do. Don't even open your mouth. Don't bother to give me any excuse. Because what you did, there is no excuse for. Yeah, I know about your childhood. We all had problems. I've heard your story before. What you did, there is no excusing. None. And under conditions, many, many conditions, etc. That is a valid statement. That is an operational statement. Do you understand that one does not preclude the other? One is not true, the other false. It is you have taken energy flowing through this planet, and if you looked at it like a string of sausages tied together, an infinite flow of kibosses, and they're all tied together. It's according to where you cut it off, and you decide. You decide. The environment, hormonal pressures outside, not an excuse, statement of fact, pressures of a biological nature on me overwhelmed me, and I did so and so. Or you could, if under conditions, say that biological forces outside your control even did something profitable to you. Somebody could admit here and there that, I would have never run that race and won, now, especially in the time I did, if I had not been here in our home stadium. And all the fans, I have never run that fast before. And so I got to admit, let's assume it's some athlete talking to an interviewer. And he might say, in the thrill of the moment after it's over, I got to admit, I have never run like this. Everybody knows that's a fact, but I don't know. It was like there's something in the air today. I guess it was the homecoming. This is homecoming time here at the school, and so many of the alumni was here, and we have never had a turnout of my own class here, and you heard how wild they were, and I don't know, just something got me. All they're describing is biological, molecular forces that actually I can't take all the credit for. Sure, I train, I try to stay in good shape, but like today, it was almost as though there was a secret, invisible wind behind my back and just blew me. And I can't take all the credit. To put energy, to slow it down enough to talk about it, and to turn it temporarily into matter, always appears to have another side, another possibility that cannot coexist. That is like the normal reality that antennas serve one purpose, to broadcast. And antennas serve another distinct purpose, to receive. But they do not do both. People believe when they are talking that they are doing one thing. I'm doing the talking, and now you're listening, and you get through what you're saying. Another person says, huh, okay. So now you listen. And they go, blah, 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 blah. You receive, then you broadcast, then you broadcast, then you receive. That is not the cause of it, but that is right at the heart of only seeing two dimensions. That is at the heart of one thing precluding another. It is at the heart now. You can forget for a second, if you can, two people talking and one broadcasts and no one receives, is in here. If I believe I'll do so and so. Well, that's all right. I could, but should I start now? Well, how much would it cost? Do I have enough time to do it? Well, I face it, I could make time, but you know, is it worth it? What if I'm just going to start it and drop it like I do a lot of stuff? There's apparently a two-person dance going on. There is apparently broadcasting and receiving going on. There is apparently energy flowing one way, then another way. There's apparently things being said and things being pondered. Things being thought about, things being anti-thought about. I have been trying to hint over the last few months and talking about overlapping, which doesn't begin to cover it. And that's where I was trying to point your attention again by saying that the human nervous system is singular in the fact that it is an antenna that both broadcasts and receives, and can do so simultaneously. The overlapping, if you had an awareness that it is not that one sentence starts and then stops. If you never stared, if you never went, all of that is the beginning and the end of a fashion statement. You have, unbeknownst to you, taken a piece of energy flowing through you, and you stopped it for a second, you hemmed it up at one end, you put words on it, and you temporarily clothed it, and it became a little piece, a little accessory, a little handbag, a scarf. And there it is. And internally you may handle it yourself. You may say, here, what do you think of this? And you may look at it and you go, huh? Or it may appear to be external. That somebody says, hey, look what I've got. And you may look at it and say, not bad. Let me say, well, look closer at it, turn it over. No, I don't really care for it. You wouldn't like to have one? I don't think. What if I told you it was cheap? Well, let me look at it again. there's apparently this continual, and Stein pointed out that jazz musicians come and go, but Lawrence Welgus forever it's a one, and a two, and it's always a two-step. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. There is a rhythm to it. Da-dum, da-dum. What if you found out that the receiving and the broadcasting, and there is no word for this on this planet, but I'm going to say, are the same thing? Or that they go on simultaneously, which is not, it doesn't begin to cover it. It should give you somewhere to start, that they're going on simultaneously. It is not one person talking and another person listening. And it is not that taking place in you. And it's more than saying it's the same thing. But there's not much more you can say with earthbound words. That it is simultaneously going on all the time. And it's not really the same thing, but it's going on simultaneously, which simultaneously is not enough. That's still a dimension short. How much time we got? Well, I guess I can speak for all of us. Why not? But that seemed to be sticky enough for 1 week. Oh, I don't know. So if we got 7 minutes, can I think real quick of some way to wrap it up that makes it sort of sound like, it wasn't all that weird. Oh, here it is. Hey, it wasn't all that weird. Sometimes crudeness is, oh, you know. Well, all of you who have not virgins to this kind of presentation do understand that it's not an attack on talk, it's not an attack on the intellect, it's certainly not an attack on the nature of life on this planet, because nothing is wrong. But the heart of what I was talking about tonight is the kind of more complex exasperation that is inherent in trying to pursue talk to some sort of more enriched limits, because it has none. Not here. The dimensions of talk as it is as it is. Talk cannot talk itself out of itself. And once you have closed something, there is no secret talk left. There is no secret word. There is no abracadabra. But a place to start looking for what people believe is the secret is the fact that what seems to be the continual dance, not just the complete dance of being alive here, but the dance of talk. That talk can only work. You got to have two people. You got to have somebody to talk and somebody to hear. We wouldn't have talk. Well, that's simple enough. I'll even agree to that on this level. So you got to have that. There have got to be two parties, or you wouldn't have talk. Nobody would ever invented talk. If you didn't have somebody to talk to, nobody would have invented talk. All right. So you got to have the talk, and the listener. But can you follow for a second, without me getting in more specific or obtuse, which at some places are the same thing? Can you see in a way that it defies all reason on this planet that by having a talker and a listener, God, what you have done makes Pandora's box opening seem like a ribbon cutting at a new McDonald's. Just nothing. That you could say, boy, all the evils of my intellectual world came about, now that you mention it, through there being somebody to talk and then somebody to listen. Did anybody follow that at all? It's not a correct statement, not from a more complex view. But do you see that would appear to be that all confusion comes about, not through talk, but because of talk? That is it. Somebody says, I was minding my own business. Somebody said, don't you try to live an upright religious life? And I went, well, yes, I do. I'm glad you noticed it. Why? Well, you know, your house burnt down last week, yeah? And all your family died of the plague, yeah? And you lost your business, yeah? And the person goes, well? You went, Jesus, I wish you hadn't mentioned that. Now I feel terrible. If the person hadn't said that, I'd be okay. What if it's all the same thing? The human nervous system, individually and collectively, is an antenna that broadcasts and receives, and there is no distinction. There is no distinction. It is arbitrary, and it happens because of the needs of life at that instant as to where the sentence begins. That is the thought. That is the talk of one nervous system says, you know, the way I acted today, the kind of enthusiasm, it was just me daydreaming and getting all worked up myself. Somebody else says it was the environment. Same thing, had the same kind of result. They got me stirred up, but it started out there. It is not different. That is why, not the only reason, but that is why all of the attempts to explain human nature at the earth level as being mechanical don't satisfy, never satisfy. Sociobiology, believing that men are simply machines driven by the gods, wound up as some kind of mechanical little monsters set in motion and they can't change themselves. You can, under conditions, many people at many times go, by God, that's a fact. And then 1 second later, somebody say it, or they even repeat it to themselves and say, damn, must have been the heat. That's not true. I know sometimes you think it's true, but, you know, shit, that ain't true. Yeah, it is. Which? Yeah, right. Yeah, but which one? I told you, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't fool me, I know. Think what would be beyond simultaneous, what would be beyond coeval, what would be beyond overlap. What would be saying that two things are the same thing, and you go, all right, I got that. And then you say, yeah, but that's nothing. And then imagine that there was not a talker, that somebody told you that, and you didn't have to be a listener and listen to it. Bye. How's that? Now that I cleared it up, goodbye.